Have global elites hijacked identity politics to divide and destroy the left in order to preserve the status quo? That's a central thesis of Olufemi Taiwo's Elite Capture, how the powerful took over identity politics and everything else. And we're going to be discussing the ideas in this book today at the People's University of Social Media. This book provides such a clear framework of understanding why the left is eating itself, why so much of our politics are running around in circles, chasing our tails. And I truly think if we can get all leftists to understand the ideas in this book, we will be infinitely more successful. And if we can't figure out the ideas in this book, we are never going to get anything done. Taiwo starts out by explaining the history of the term identity politics. The term was coined by the Combahee River Collective, a Black, queer, feminist, socialist organization in the 1970s. These women felt their priorities weren't being addressed by the Black organizing movement, the queer organizing movement, or the feminist organizing movement. And so this is, many years before the term intersectionality would be coined, but that's sort of what they were arguing for. They were saying we have a right to organize politically rooted in our shared identities and experiences as Black queer women. But they always, had a political goal of doing this in solidarity with a diverse coalition of organizers who are all working towards collective liberation, right? So this was never about dividing Black queer feminists off from everyone else, but rather saying we can show up in a diverse coalition. An example of diverse coalitional organizing is the Free Palestine movement. When you go to a protest and you see a group of Palestinians, a group of Jews, a group of communists, a group of Black folks who all have their own, identity groups, but they're showing up in a diverse coalition, that's the type of organizing that the Combahee River Collective had in mind. Unfortunately, Taiwo believes that the term identity politics and many of the language developed around it have been hijacked by elites in a process known as elite capture. So this is when a relatively privileged group take the political projects of a less privileged group and use it to benefit themselves. Taiwo is quick to point out this is a system behavior, meaning it's an observable, predictable pattern, not necessarily a conspiracy. So this isn't necessarily like a global cabal of global elites got together in 2020 and we're like, how can we use the BLM movement to make more money for ourselves? Although I think on a smaller scale that absolutely does happen. Like were individual, marketing departments of different corporations having explicit conversations about how do we use the BLM movement to make ourselves more money? Yes, absolutely. But regardless of whether it's that intentional and overt or not, elites are gonna capture. It just happens, right? And even if it wasn't under capitalism, right? Any situation where you have a privileged group and a less privileged group, you're going to see this elite capture happening. That inevitability might make you want to despair, but Taiwo reassures us if we can recognize elite capture, we can fight it. And the book is full of tons of examples to help you get better at spotting elite capture. Since I read this, I've been seeing it everywhere from, breakdancing appearing at the Olympics to the way the Harris Waltz campaign are using Kamala Harris's identity to shut down and silence Free Palestine supporters. Tell me in the comments where you've seen elite capture showing up in our world. And with the rest of the book, Taiwo gives us this amazing framework for understanding the difference between two types of politics. Deference politics, which is what has happened as identity politics has been captured by the elites, and constructive politics, which we need to move towards as the left if we're ever going to get anything done. So deference politics is very focused on the process of how we organize. It's about modifying interpersonal interactions, so how we talk to each other, email each other, in compliance with the perceived wishes of the marginalized. Okay, it asks us to center the most marginalized person, but the subtext is we're centering the most marginalized person in the room, in the classroom, in the boardroom, but whoever we perceive as the most marginalized person in the room doesn't necessarily take into account all the marginalized people outside the room. Also, the person who may be most marginalized in the room may be extremely privileged in other ways. The result is a politics that gives us more advice about how to allocate tasks at a meeting than how to keep people alive. And it's a politics that's very focused on symbols, on semantics, on wording, rather than money, structures, housing, life and death things. Now, everyone who practices deference politics isn't necessarily an elite narc trying to destroy the movement from within. I did a lot of deference politicking, throughout the years before I kind of got wise to it, even before I had like the language for this. But let's look at why deference politics can be so destructive for the left and why it serves elite interests. Well, first of all, it can be used to silence good anti-elite ideas. And it can do that by asking us to defer to someone who's a plant or a narc or a cop, or even just someone who's kind of self-involved and doesn't recognize their own privilege in other ways. Like whoever's the most marginalized person in the room might not have the best ideas for how to dismantle empire. They may be more interested in preserving the status quo. It also diverts our limited attention and time as leftists towards symbols, towards semantics, again, rather than towards these sort of life and death things. And of course, it can be used to break solidarity in the name of political purity. I have so many thoughts on this. I can make so many videos about the ways that leftists are destroying constructivist projects in the name of political purity because a venue or a outlet or a publisher or some kind of platform that we could use to build power is perceived as politically impure, and therefore, some people's whole politics is tearing down constructivist projects in the name of deference politics. But put a pin in that. What is constructive politics, where we need to be moving? Well, constructive politics cares more about outcome than process. It's just more important. It's about building power, okay? Education is so important to building power. Mutual aid projects, redistributing wealth. Labor unions, we're building networks, we're building new spaces. What are you building? If you can't answer that question, your politics might not be doing very much. It is also a simultaneous dismantling and constructing. So a dismantling of the machinery of empire, the systems that are toxic and poisoning us, and constructing something new to take care of us to build power. Constructive politics are a world-making project. We need to think big. We need to be strategic. Strike at the heart of the matter, the root of the issue, right? And keep a global scope. Even while working on local issues, right? We can keep a global mindset of how does this local issue plug in globally. There's that old adage about organizing where like if everyone pulls on their own little thread, eventually the sweater will unravel. But I've come to believe that is false, because when capitalists have massive fast fashion machines where they're able to churn out hundreds of thousands of yards of knitwear every second, pulling at one little thread just isn't gonna do the trick. We need to find a seam, get a pair of scissors, be strategic. Taiwo cautions, moving from deference to constructive politics doesn't mean white cis straight men in the room that you guys get to just start shouting everybody down again. Like the lessons learned from identity politics and from deference politics about how we should listen to people's shared experiences, we should take them into consideration. We should still do that. We should listen and take into consideration, but not necessarily immediately defer and not employ any critical thinking. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to become sidetracked and obsessed with semantics and symbols when there's so many life or death causes we could be organizing around. My little attempt at a constructivist politics is this video and creating the People's University of social media. So many of us book talkers, we recommend books, but we're not really sharing the education inside of them. And not all of us have the ability or the time to read, digest, and synthesize, books of leftist practice or historical information or whatever, nonfiction text might be helpful to our shared struggle. So if you want to be a professor at the People's University of social media, read a helpful book and tell us what's inside of it. If you think that's going to hurt authors, it's not. Sound off in the comments if you were not thinking of buying this book before now, but now you are. And another powerful form of constructive politics is mutual aid. To that end, if you'd like to pay some tuition towards the People's University for this class, Go to the first link in my bio and donate that to the Rafat al-Arir camp, providing housing for the most vulnerable families in Gaza.